Most gardeners think planting season ends in spring, get everything in the ground by June, then just maintain it until frost kills it all back, and you start the whole cycle over again next April. Here's what that mindset costs you: an entire season of missed opportunity, because September might be the single best planting window of the entire year, and almost nobody uses it. The soil is still warm from summer, holding on to months of accumulated heat several inches down, even as the air temperature finally cools, and the brutal, punishing heat that kills or stresses spring transplants just as they're trying to establish is gone for the year. Today I'm giving you 7 perennials to get in the ground this September, plants that will use the next 2 months to build root systems before winter dormancy sets in, then explode out of the ground next spring already established, a full season ahead of anything you plant in April. Stay with me, because number 1 on this list actually blooms better when planted in fall than in spring, which almost nobody realizes, and it directly contradicts what most garden centers train you to assume. If you want more practical, zone-specific plant guides like this one, subscribe now, because I've got a whole season of these coming. Let's get into it. Plant number 7, aster. If there's one plant that proves September is a real planting window, and not just a leftover afterthought for procrastinators, it's this one, because aster is actively blooming right now, in September and October, which means you're not planting a dormant stick and hoping for the best months later. You're planting something already putting on a genuine show the moment it goes in the ground. It produces masses of daisy-like flowers in purple, violet, pink, and white, with a bright yellow center, and it's one of the last major nectar sources available for migrating monarch butterflies before their long, multi-thousand-mile flight south to their overwintering grounds in Mexico. USDA zones 4 through 8 for most native varieties. Here's the golden information that makes fall planting specifically ideal for aster rather than just acceptable, because the soil is still warm in September, holding on to summer's accumulated heat well below the surface. Roots continue actively growing for weeks, even as the top growth naturally slows down in preparation for winter, giving the plant a genuine, measurable head start compared to a spring-planted aster that has to build its entire root system from scratch, while also trying to bloom in that same compressed season. Plant it in full sun to part shade with average well-drained soil, and by next fall, a September-planted aster will typically be noticeably larger, bushier, and more floriferous than an identical plant put in the ground the following spring instead. Divide it every 2 to 3 years once established to keep it vigorous and prevent the center of the clump from thinning out. Plant number 6, sedum, specifically the tall border varieties like Autumn Joy and Matrona. This is genuinely one of the best plants to buy in September, for reasons that go beyond the plant's biology and into simple, practical timing, because most garden centers are discounting perennials heavily right as September arrives, and sedum happens to be hitting peak visual appeal at exactly that same moment, flat-topped flower heads transitioning from pale green to rosy pink to rich copper red, right on schedule this time of year. USDA zones 3 through 9. Sedum's thick, succulent leaves store water and energy internally, which means a September-planted sedum isn't relying entirely on fragile new roots to survive its first winter the way a more delicate perennial would. It's drawing on substantial reserves, already built directly into the plant's own tissue. Plant it in full sun, with lean, well-drained soil, and resist the urge to amend with rich compost, since that works against sedum's natural preferences rather than helping it. Leave the dried flower heads standing through winter for structural interest in an otherwise bare garden, and to feed migrating monarchs on their way through, since tall sedum is a well-documented refueling stop for them across the entire eastern flyway during fall migration. By next summer, a full-planted sedum will already have a fully developed root system handling drought conditions without any supplemental help from you whatsoever. Plant number 5, Russian sage. September planting works especially well for this particular plant because Russian sage genuinely dislikes being disturbed while it's actively growing and flowering hard through summer heat. But by September, the plant is naturally beginning to slow down for the season, which makes transplant stress dramatically lower than a spring or summer planting attempt would cause. USDA zones 4 through 9. The silvery blue haze of tiny flowers is often still going strong in September in most zones, giving you an immediate visual payoff in the garden while the roots quietly settle in underground before the first real frost arrives. It genuinely prefers poor, dry soil over anything rich or amended, and the cooling September air combined with occasional fall rainfall gives it ideal establishment moisture without the real risk of summer overwatering, which kills more Russian sage in home gardens than any pest or disease ever could. Cut it back hard in early spring rather than in fall, since the standing structure provides some genuine winter interest against snow and offers a small measure of cold protection for the crown underneath. Plant it in full sun, and by the following summer, a fall-established Russian sage will typically be noticeably fuller, taller, and more floriferous than an equivalent spring-planted specimen still working to catch up. Plant number 4, coneflower, echinacea. Fall planting is actually the traditional, time-tested way to establish echinacea, going back generations before modern garden centers began pushing spring planting as the assumed default, purely for retail convenience and impulse buy timing. USDA zones 3 through 9. Here's the golden information explaining precisely why fall is the more natural choice. Echinacea is a genuine prairie native, and prairie ecosystems naturally disperse their seed in late summer and fall as flower heads dry and split open, meaning the plant's entire underlying biology is built around establishing roots through autumn, surviving winter dormancy, and then exploding into vigorous growth the following spring, already fully primed for it. A September-planted echinacea spends the next 2 months building that signature deep taproot in cooling, still workable soil, and by the time next summer's punishing heat finally arrives, it's already fully equipped to handle it, rather than still trying to establish a root system while simultaneously surviving its very first heat wave at the same time. Plant it in full sun with average, lean soil, avoid rich or heavily fertilized beds entirely, and leave the seed heads standing through winter specifically for goldfinches, who rely on them heavily through the coldest months. A fall-planted echinacea will typically outperform a same-sized spring-planted specimen quite noticeably by its second full growing season. Plant number 3, black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia. September is an excellent window for this particular plant, for a very specific and often overlooked reason: self-seeding timing that most gardeners never think to consider. If you already have Rudbeckia established somewhere in your yard, September is exactly when it's naturally dropping seed on its own, and planting new nursery starts alongside that natural seed drop creates a far more cohesive, genuinely naturalized-looking patch than adding new plants at some mismatched point later in the year would produce. USDA zones 3 through 9. It blooms from July all the way through October, so a September-planted Rudbeckia may very well still be actively flowering when you put it in the ground, giving you the same kind of immediate visual payoff that aster offers this same month. It handles heavy clay soil better than almost anything else you could plant during this window, and its fibrous, wide-spreading root system makes efficient use of the remaining warm weeks to spread outward before true winter dormancy sets in for the season. Plant it in full sun, resist the urge to amend the soil heavily beforehand, and by next season you'll have a noticeably more established, fuller plant than an equivalent spring transplant would give you, plus the added bonus of self-seeded volunteer plants beginning to fill in naturally all around it. Plant number 2, peony. This is the plant that most emphatically should never be planted in spring, and almost nobody watching this realizes it, largely because peonies are sold in nurseries year-round, without much explanation of timing. Peonies planted in spring often sulk visibly for a full year or more before producing any real bloom at all, sometimes taking 2 or even 3 full years to properly establish and flower, while peonies planted in September, when the soil is cooling but still fully workable, root vigorously through the fall months and are frequently blooming by their very first spring instead. USDA zones 3 through 8. Here's the golden information explaining exactly why this difference exists botanically. Peony roots genuinely need a period of soil temperatures sitting roughly between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit in order to properly initiate the following year's growth buds, technically called eyes, and September through October soil conditions across most of the peony's hardy range deliver precisely that temperature window entirely naturally, while spring soil, by contrast, warms up too quickly and moves past that ideal window, before the plant can fully take advantage of it. Plant the crown with the eyes facing upward, no more than 1 to 2 inches below the actual soil surface, since planting too deep is genuinely the single most common reason home gardeners find their peonies refusing to bloom for years on end. Full sun and rich, well-drained soil are both essential for long-term success. Once properly established from a correctly timed fall planting, a single peony can live and reliably bloom for 50 years or considerably more without ever needing division. And that brings us to number 1, the plant that actually blooms better when planted in fall than in spring, which almost nobody realizes, because the near universal assumption is that spring planting always means faster, more immediate flowers. That plant is daylily, and here's exactly why it earns the top spot specifically for a September planting window. Most people plant daylilies in spring purely because that's when garden centers display them already in bloom, deliberately tempting an impulse purchase at the point of maximum visual appeal. But daylilies planted in September instead, while the soil is still meaningfully warm, spend the next 2 full months building a substantially larger root mass than a spring-planted division of the exact same size would manage, precisely because they're not simultaneously trying to produce flowers and foliage at the very same time the way a spring planting is forced to do. USDA zones 3 through 9. Here's the golden information that makes this genuinely counterintuitive but well-documented fact true. University trial gardens have repeatedly found, across multiple independent studies, that fall-divided and fall-planted daylilies, given a reasonable 6 to 8 weeks before hard frost arrives to properly establish, consistently produce more flowerscapes and noticeably larger individual blooms in their very first full spring than daylilies planted that same spring instead, essentially skipping an entire year of the establishment lag that spring planting typically requires. Plant it in full sun to part shade, water it consistently right up until the ground actually freezes for the season, and mulch lightly after the first hard frost, specifically to protect the still settling root system through the winter months ahead. A September-planted daylily, given this genuine head start, will frequently outperform a full 2-year-old spring-planted division by the time of its very first real bloom season. So here's how these 7 actually work together this September, across your whole yard. Aster and sedum give you an immediate payoff right away, both already actively blooming as you plant them, so your fall garden looks genuinely intentional and finished, rather than freshly disturbed and bare. Russian sage and coneflower use the cooling soil to quietly build the deep, resilient root systems that will carry them confidently through next summer's punishing heat, without any babying or extra attention required from you at all. Rudbeckia settles in alongside its own natural seed drop happening at the exact same time, creating a far more cohesive, naturalized planting than any other point in the calendar year could realistically offer. And peony and daylily, planted right now in September, will simply outperform anything you plant next spring instead, arriving at their first real, substantial bloom season, a full year ahead of schedule, compared to spring-planted equivalents. September genuinely isn't a consolation planting window for people who missed spring. For at least half of everything on this list, it's demonstrably the better choice botanically, not merely an acceptable backup plan. Here's the honest takeaway before you go. Every single plant on this list benefits from the exact same underlying seasonal condition, soil that's still warm enough deep down to support active root growth, but air that's finally cool enough above ground to stop stressing the plant while it's trying to establish. That specific combination exists almost nowhere else in the entire calendar year as reliably as it does right now, in September and spring, for all its long-standing reputation as the default planting season everyone defaults to, actually forces plants to build root systems and produce top growth simultaneously under steadily rising heat, which is a genuinely harder biological task than what a proper fall planting offers instead. So here's the challenge I want to leave you with. Pick 2 or 3 of these plants that match your zone and your soil conditions, and get them properly in the ground within the next few weeks, while there's still enough residual warm soil left in the ground to actually matter for root establishment. If any of this helped you today, or if you've had good or bad luck with fall planting in your own yard before, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the moment, because every week I put out exactly this kind of practical, honest plant guide. No filler, no generic advice that ignores actual timing and biology. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. Now go get something in the ground before this window closes on you, because next spring's genuine head start is being decided right now, this month, not next April.